So welcome. This is session 4 of our AR workshops for the Apple Regional Training Center. This session is going to talk about your next steps with augmented reality. So the first half of our 6-week course really focused a lot on making use of tools like Keynote and Tinkercad for 2D and 3D creations. Whereas now we're going to be really diving into how do we start to bring all those elements together and make use of them cohesively in one place. So this is going to be focusing on the App Reality Composer. So as always, I want to welcome you to the session. Please take a moment to write in the chat and introduce yourselves. I know we have a few new faces joining us this time. If you can just let us know your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. My name is Lindsay Stuttard. I'm a digital teaching and learning specialist for the ACS International Schools based in the UK. I am an Apple teacher and Apple Distinguished Educator. And this is part of the ACS International Apple Regional Training Center, one of the new ones for this academic year. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at ACSRTC. My username is @linsdive85, and you can email us. You probably received an email from us with the information for today's session. It's acsinternationalrtc@gmail.com. And it's great to see so many people jumping in from lots of different places around the world. You are very welcome. We are happy to have you joining in with us today. As always, we're going to have a recap and reflection from our previous session. Then we'll be going into the hands-on exploration, connecting and doing some discussions as well. And then we will close the session with a bit of follow-up at the end. So throughout this course, as I said, it's been a 6-week course aimed at improving your understanding of AR in education. We're really looking to maximize content creation within your iPad and hopefully to build a set of skills. This has been designed as a progression. So we've started off with some basics and we're now halfway into the workshop sessions. We're hopefully going to be building up your skill set so that you can create more immersive AR experiences or support your students in making their own AR experiences to model their learning and understanding as well. So this is our progression so far. We did a focus on AR Maker. We've done a focus on Keynote, and our previous session was a focus on Tinkercad. So now we're looking at more of the playground approach of focus on Reality Composer. For this session, you need to make sure that you have your iPad available, that you have the Reality Composer app available as well. And if you have just joined us this time, we are making use of a Pages workbook where you can document different ideas and any progress that you make, taking away from our sessions and applying directly into your classroom. So inspired by the Apple Teacher portfolio from the Apple Teacher Learning Center, we definitely want to make use of that resource as a cumulative portfolio of everything that you've learned through these 6 weeks. Our key learning outcomes for this session today is really to understand the Reality Composer interface. It can be quite daunting your first time going in. There's a lot of tools, and if you're not quite sure where to start, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So we definitely want to make sure that at the very least you walk away with a better understanding of the Reality Composer interface. We want to talk about how you could apply this to different curriculum topics. So we've got some examples to share with you. And then ideally managing files for sharing. We may get to this session, or it may have to wait until session number 5. We'll see how things go. So I'd like to take a moment to have you jump into the chat again, and you can respond with either words or a little emoji character, whatever you think is right for you, about how do you feel at this moment about using Reality Composer. Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling a bit worried? Are you thinking that, gosh, this really isn't for me, and maybe you're a bit embarrassed or feeling a bit shy about using it? Anything that you want to share, there's no shame whatsoever. Just please go ahead and let us know how you're feeling about using Reality Composer, and we'll give you about 30 seconds to go ahead and do that now. I can see most of us are feeling happy, excited. Yeah, not sure where to start. Well, that's where this session is going to come in really handy. A little bit nervous, that's good. Mostly happy, so that's positive. We're heading in the right direction. Thank you for being brave and for sharing. So as always, we're going to have a recap and a reflection on what we did with our Tinkercad session about 2 weeks ago. So with Tinkercad, excuse me, we talked about how you go about doing importing and exporting, how to make use of drawing tools within there using the scribble feature, understanding about 3D objects and how we export those as particular file types, making use of the shapes and formatting those shapes, making use of the text feature in Tinkercad, and then incorporating drawings from Google Drawings, making SVG types of files. And then if necessary, utilizing the different languages and keyboards to make different language text files that you can bring in through SVG and have those as part of your 3D content creations in Tinkercad. So we talked about a fair amount of different ideas and how you can utilize those in your classroom with Tinkercad. So I would be very interested to know, we've been apart for 2 weeks now, in what ways were you able to integrate content creations with Tinkercad in your classroom? So from when we last met up, have you been able to take any of the knowledge and the skills that we talked about and we had to play with in Tinkercad and applied them into your classrooms since we last met? It'd be really great if you could share anything that you've had a success with or something that the students had success with, so that others can learn from you as well. So you have about 30 seconds again to pop any comments relating to this discussion topic in the chat. Fantastic. Leslie's put down that she's been able to create more of her own assets. Oh, good, using Tinkercad as a starting point for a new unit to get the learners excited about it. Fantastic. Glad to hear, Leslie, you felt more comfortable with it after our last lesson. That's wonderful. So do keep any suggestions coming. We are going to go ahead and progress. So as always, the workbook is your place, your portfolio to gather any key takeaways from the session or any suggestions from anyone else commenting in the chat. You do, again, have 4 different pages all about our reality composer. So again, a section for the key takeaways, different questions here about the connections that you can make to your curriculum with what we're talking about in the session, how you will prepare your students to use Reality Composer, and in what ways can using Reality Composer provide more access for your students. And access could be thinking about it in terms of accessibility, where you're reaching more students, or providing it as a tool for students to share their knowledge and thoughts to you in a particular way. Again, you have places to include your own thoughts and ideas and any examples that you create through screenshots or screen recordings, and then the reflection questions at the end. So let's take a look at the enhanced AR experiences that get brought to life utilizing Reality Composer. And I'm going to hand it over to one of my colleagues who has been studying with me for the last year on utilizing Reality Composer to make her own AR integrated escape rooms for her students. So Leslie, you can come on your mic and we'll go ahead and talk about the example that you provided today.
So thank you. I have to say that, and Lindsay knows this for me, that this has been a real journey to feel comfortable doing my own thing with Reality Composer from when I first started until now. So what I've done here is I've just created something for my math students to do a ratios unit review after coming back from a break. And they don't really interact with the room other than just walking through it, but it's getting them outside of the classroom. We can take our iPads outside. They'll work in pairs, and they have questions and everything that they need to help them review what we learned before the break. And I tried to make it where it looks like my classroom. So that picture in the back is just a picture of my back wall. The rug on the floor is the rug in my room. And then I've just put some bits and bobs around the room that we have. You know, and it's just having 8 questions, and the kids can work together to answer those questions. But it's just something else to bring kind of math to light to them outside of the classroom. And I just thought this was a way to bring us back after a break. Not as intensive as some of the other stuff that I've done, but still something that used assets from Tinkercad. In fact, that raspberry basket and the raspberries, the kangaroo, the other things are all from Tinkercad, the copier machine. So all of that comes from that. And I just had fun making this, and I hope the kids have fun walking through it. It's just it's a great thing to do. Very exciting. I enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Leslie. As you can see, Leslie's made use of both 2D and 3D content that she has created or has located, as she mentioned, in the gallery in Tinkercad. But what we found on this campus is by providing these types of resources to the students, especially when we had students that were distance learning or when we had the lockdowns going on, that we were still able to provide immersive learning experiences that got kids up and moving around with their iPad, taking it outside and getting that fresh air, but still being able to explore and learn in a fun and engaging way. And yes, one could argue that you could just put those 8 questions up on a Google Slides or in a Keynote presentation and share it to students, and they could just answer it and it would be done very, very simply. But by creating something in this manner, this type of file, means that students are going to be outside, they're going to work in partners, they're going to physically move around and interact, and it's going to give them a bit more confidence when we start to use more intensive AR with behaviors and sounds and actions and so on. So this is a good preliminary way that still ties into the content that Leslie wants to cover with the students relating to ratios within their maths units. So again, a great way to integrate AR directly into a maths lesson, makes it fun and engaging. And I would imagine if Leslie has a student that happens to be absent, that file can be shared to a student, they can access it at home and still have that great lesson available if they're staying home isolating. So thank you very much for sharing that, Leslie. And we do have a few other examples for you. This was a pumpkin patch escape room that had maths activities inside for the students. This is aimed at more sort of primary age children, where they have to walk around the pumpkin patch and interact with the pumpkins or the different creatures in there in order to complete different maths activities. Again, most of this content was created in Tinkercad, with the 2D text being brought in from Keynote and attached to signs that are part of Reality Composer. As you might remember before, we've had different Mesopotamia escape room style activities for students as part of the social studies unit. So again, bringing in those Tinkercad models and combining them with 2D text content that has been created for the students by the teachers, with questions for them to find and answer. Or ancient Egyptian pyramid escape rooms, where students have to walk around and explore the pyramid. That was created in Tinkercad, utilizing as well some 2D creations from Keynote. And as students explore the pyramids, they have to interact with the different pieces that are hidden inside the room to answer the questions or to complete the different tasks that the teacher assigns to them. What about providing everything as very simple 2D creations, all done as hand drawings or combinations of clip art and Keynote, with maybe a few 3D objects thrown in, such as those crayons, just as a provocation to get them thinking about stories. So what could be happening in this world? Why are the characters going around and coloring it in? Why do some of them look happy? Some of them look sad? Why is that eagle chasing the man? What's happening with this person with the dogs? There's lots of different ways you could use this as provocations for students to get them thinking. Or maybe it's going on a deep sea dive and exploring under the ocean with 2D and 3D content that you've created, and make it feel like the students are underwater and exploring a coral reef. There could be text that's embedded in there with facts about the coral reef, such as the Great Barrier Reef and how it's starting to be eroded. You could include different types of science content directly into these experiences for your students to help them understand really as in-depth as we can get it to be and as immersive as possible, what the effects are of humans and pollution that's happening to our coral reefs. So those are just a few examples of things that we've done on our campus with some of our teachers and our students to really give you an idea of what you can create with Reality Composer. So let's take a look now at the interface when we start building with Reality Composer. The first thing it's important to understand is when you're working with AR, your AR needs to be anchored to something to help it lay over what you have in the real world. And so there's 5 different options when it comes to anchoring in Reality Composer. You have a horizontal interface, and this tends to be the most commonly used one, where you are layering everything on a flat surface, a horizontal surface like a floor or a tabletop. You can then move on to vertical anchors, where you have things that will pop up on a vertical surface, such as the wall or a window, or maybe a poster that you've got out in your hallways. You can then do image layering. So you have a composition that comes to life when it appears on top of a particular type of image, as well as your face. Now, this is a less used one because it requires the use of a true depth camera. And so not every student or teacher is going to have access to that. And it also makes it's a bit more difficult to integrate into your content that you're covering. So there's not many people that make use of that one, but just so you know, it is there. And then the 5th one is an object, so that you could physically pick something up and move it around, and it would have an AR experience attached to it, very similar to the idea of the merge cube, if you've ever heard of those before. So those are your 5 main anchors that you would have to pick before you can start creating in Reality Composer. Now, once you have selected your anchor, let's say in this case, it's going to be a horizontal surface. There are 3 ways that you can add your content directly into Reality Composer. The first is to import, and this is when you're bringing your content in, most likely from your files or from somewhere else that you've stored the content. The second is to make use of the content library. Reality Composer does have its own content library of some 3D content that you can make use of. Some of it you can customize and some of it you can't. So it's always good to get in and explore and see what's available. And then the third is to do a drag and drop, which makes use of split screen, where when you're working in Reality Composer, you can't do a true split screen. It just won't support it. But what you can do is hover your secondary application on top of it, select what you want, and then drag and drop it directly into Reality Composer. And this is a great way of being able to bring in your 2D content, such as clip art or drawings or text that you've made in Keynote, get them right into Reality Composer, or things such as those wonderful designs that you've made in Photo Booth. Now, I put a little cloud icon on top of the option in the middle there for Content Library. And the reason being is that every piece of the content library, when it comes to those 3D models, will likely have a little cloud icon next to it for download. And it's important that you download as much content as you want ahead of time so that you can start building. But it's also important to understand that if you're creating a Reality Composer file and you aim to share that file with other users through airdropping or through other means, the other users won't be able to view any of that content unless they've downloaded it in Reality Composer themselves. So if you anticipate students working on a file that you share to them, the content won't appear, such as that tree, for example, unless they've gone into Reality Composer, gone into the content library, and downloaded it ahead of time. So it's really just something important to remember. Whereas if you're importing 3D files from your Tinkercad creations or doing drag and drop, when you share files with those types of content, it will be embedded and it won't require the students to have to download anything else. So we're only talking about the content library that is native to Reality Composer. So I'm hoping that that makes sense, but we'll see when we start to get playing around more what you'll see when we go into it. There are some ways that you can configure your content once you've brought it into your Reality Composer file. The first is rotating. So you're obviously working in a different way here than you are with AR Maker. With AR Maker, you have to work actively in AR. So you are layering right into the real world. Whereas with Reality Composer, you're building your scene essentially, and then are going to view what it looks like in AR after. So it's important to understand that when you're building and working in Reality Composer, you're utilizing the X, Y, and Z axis. So that's what those 3 different colors indicate. And you'll be able to rotate your content based on where they are on those different types of axes. So that's something just to get your head wrapped around, is it's a bit different than AR Maker. AR Maker, you physically move your device, or you physically move the items based on up or down or side to side with the grids. Whereas this one, you have to be able to rotate using those X, Y, and Z axes. The second is resizing. So you should be able to tap on an item in Reality Composer, a piece of content, and then go ahead and resize it. This is under the transform option. So again, you can rotate it in that way. I tend to just go with my hands directly on the object and rotate, as well as resizing, but you can go ahead in the options here and transform and resize in that way. And the third one is to customize the appearance. So a lot of the content library from Reality Composer will allow you to make customizations, such as some of the basic shapes, such as the signs and symbols, but also some of the 3D objects. You'll be able to transform the appearance of them. Now, this is only possible for the native content library. It does not work or apply to any content that you bring in from Tinkercad as a 3D object, or from other apps that would do 2D content creation, such as Keynote. So it's important just to understand that customizing is really based on the content library that's native to the app itself. The fourth thing we're going to talk about, and we'll go into it a bit more in session 5, is adding behaviors. Now, this is again a stark contrast from AR Maker. So AR Maker allows you to do some very basic rudimentary animations to the content that you bring into it, such as getting things to flash, jiggle, to rotate, and to orbit. Whereas in Reality Composer, you can set things to behave a particular way, and to do a series of different behaviors based on how you are setting it up. So on the left-hand side, you have the options for adding behaviors. And this is when you are viewing in AR and you have pressed the play button, what kind of animation is going to occur, or what kind of behavior is going to occur. So this could be, I'm going to tap on an object and it's going to start flipping, and it's going to flip for 10 times before it stops. Or it could be that I tap on an object and it plays a particular sound. Or I can tap on an object and add a physical force to it. I can have an object that starts hidden when the scene begins and I press play, and then it slowly will appear in the scene. Or I can have an object that waits and shows itself based on my proximity to it. Or I can get really custom, and that can be either I want this to happen when I tap on something, or I want this to happen when I get close to it with my iPad, or I want this to happen when the scene starts. So you can really customize your different content quite specifically. And then you have your range of actions. These are the things that your different content can do. So adding behavior is how you get it to start. It's like your triggers. And then the action is what it will actually do when you're in the scene. So you can make things spin, you can make them orbit, you can add a physical force, you can make them hide, you can make them reappear, you can make them grow in size or shrink down, you can make them move around. There's a lot of different options, and it's really just getting in there and playing with them to figure out what the best is. But I do want to highlight that we will be visiting behaviors again in session 5 when we're talking about integrating sound with GarageBand. And the last is, once we have created a scene, we've set our behaviors, we know what the content's going to do, is viewing it in AR. So obviously at the button at the top of your Reality Composer window, you have an option there that says AR. And when you tap on that, that will then take whatever you have created, all the content that you've brought into your file, what it will then look like in the real world. So I will just pause before we go into the demo, just to check if anyone has any questions, or if you're okay to proceed, if you just want to give me a thumbs up in the chat there. So is everyone okay for us to keep going? Fantastic. Okay. So now we're going to jump over into the demo. And this is where you're going to need your iPad, you're going to need Reality Composer. We're going to start creating a scene. I'm just going to get my light to turn back on because it's just turned off. Okay. So what we want to do is open up Reality Composer. And if you have already been playing around, you may start to see that some of your previous projects are here. I've obviously been doing a lot with it. If you haven't, you're going to want to go up to your plus, and we're going to create a new project. And here's where you're going to see those 5 anchors that I talked about. So we have horizontal, vertical, image, face, or object. We're going to go ahead and start with a horizontal anchor. Now, right away, you have almost like a placeholder object. So we want to take that out. And what we want to do with that is to tap on it and tap again, and then you get that pop-up menu of options. And we're going to go ahead and click delete. And the same for that little text box as well. We're going to tap on it, tap again, and click delete. So what we want to do is start with essentially a blank slate, and we're going to build from there. You might notice on the right hand side that those options have come up to do customizing or to attach physics, and you can just tap that again and make it disappear. So the first thing that we need to get comfortable with is using our fingers to pinch in and to zoom out. Now, Reality Composer is set to be 1 meter grids, essentially 1 meter blocks here. So you can really incorporate measurements for your students when they're utilizing Reality Composer. I tend to work based on sight, that if I get everything approximately the right size, that I can always scale things up later on when I'm actively using Reality Composer. So the first thing we're going to do is tap on our plus button, and this is going to take us into the content library. Now you'll see either you'll have a little cloud with an arrow to download content, or it will say that things are already downloaded. And we've got basic shapes to start off with. We've got text that we can bring in and customize, arrows, call outs, and then signs and charts. So these are some of the more customizable content within the library. But then it starts to break it down into different categories. So chess pieces, games, we've got different events, lots of different content. Some of these are quite small items that you can bring in. And then we start to move down to a bit more of the bigger items, such as different places and buildings. Now, again, depending on what version of Reality Composer you have, I'm currently using an iPad Pro 2020 with iOS 15. If you're running an older version, you may not see as much content, but once you update your iOS, then you should start to see more of that content come through. But here we go. So I've not made use of any of the astronomy features, and that's why you can see the download option is there for me to bring those items in. And so again, if your students are viewing a scene that you've created and have shared with them in Reality Composer, they will need to have the content downloaded ahead of time as well. But for this one, what we're going to try and do is start to build a basic scene utilizing some of the places. And what we will end up doing is bringing in some 2D and 3D content from Keynote and from Tinkercad as well. So under the places option, let's go ahead and just bring any type of building in that you want. So you may have some of the same as me, you may not, that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and bring in this right there. And so now I've got this nice 3D model. I'm just moving my finger around the screen so that I can see all the different sides of it. And I can also slide underneath and get a look to make sure that it is sitting directly on, there we go, directly on the grid, that there's no gaps underneath. Now, if I want to make changes to this, I can tap on it and immediately I can start to move it from side to side or forwards and backwards, or move it up and down on those axes. And while it's selected, I can come in and I can change the look of this particular building. So I can come in and I can change it to be a particular color if I want, which makes it very, very basic. Or I can go back to that stylized look there. Now you'll obviously have a lot more options if you're using some of the really basic content such as shapes or the signs or the arrows. But with the particular content like this, that's a bit more customized, you have a bit less choice. So go ahead and make use of some of the different content library. Go ahead and bring in some different items, whatever you want, and just build a little scene. Just so that you get used to rotating around, getting close up to objects, getting further away, resizing or shifting their location around. In the nature options, you can also bring in some more plants. You can duplicate those by tapping on them. So really quite basic. I'll just give you another minute to bring those in before we jump into Keynote. And you'll have to be really careful when you shrink things down. You can see that sometimes they get stuck inside other objects. So you can get really close to them, and that should help you then to start to move them to where you need them to be. So it does take a little bit of finagling around a bit. And just put some potted plants outside this building here. Okay. And as you notice, you're essentially building on a giant empty grid. You're not going to see what this looks like until you press that view in AR button, but we're not going to do that just yet. So what I want to do now is jump in to Keynote. And I've just got a basic Keynote with some shapes. And again, this goes back to session 2 when we talked about how to make use of the clip art, how to make use of drawing and text in our Keynote. And what we're going to do now is essentially the drag and drop import of content into Reality Composer. So go ahead and open Keynote, pick any clip art item that you would like to have added into your scene, and then we'll go ahead and do a drag and drop of that content into Reality Composer. So I'll give you about another 30 seconds to a minute to find what it is that you'd like to have. You can combine clip art to make things like roads, which is always fun, or bring text boxes in, and those could be on signs that you want to have around your scene. Sort of limitless possibilities. So I'm going to jump back into Reality Composer, and I'm just going to do a slow swipe from the bottom here so that the dock will appear. I'm going to bring Keynote, and it's just going to hover on the side, and I'm going to release it. And that way I can still see my Reality Composer file that I'm working in, but I can also see the content that I've created in Keynote. And it's really a very simple process to do the drag and drop of adding content, where I'm going to put my finger on this item until you can see that it's selected. In this case, the flower. Whoop. And then while it's selected, just really drag it over somewhere, anywhere, it doesn't really matter, in your Reality Composer file and let go. And then what you can see is it will essentially sit flat, almost like it's a piece of paper laying on a surface. And then what we have to do is, first of all, resize it, because that's not keeping in with the size of what we're trying to create here. And then rotate it. So I essentially want to put this flower into one of those little potted plants that I put on the doorstep. So I need to rotate it on the different axes and then resize it down. I tend to just grab the edge of the ring and either pull it up or shrink it down that way. That's my approach, but you're welcome to make use of the resizing options here with scale. That's fine too. Whatever your preference is. And then just sliding it along, you can see that yellow line underneath it is showing where it's going to be within the file. And just keep shrinking it down and moving it over until it fully is sitting in that plant pot there. Now I'll just make some small adjustments, but then there it is. And the nice thing with this approach of bringing that 2D content in is I don't have to keep importing. If I want to have more of that type of flower, so say I want to have another one in this pot, I can simply tap on it while it's selected and duplicate it. And then I've got another copy of that flower that I can go ahead and use. I'm going to turn it around the other way and then pop it into this plant here. And now I've got a 2D content clip art from Keynote sitting within Reality Composer and sort of enhancing the 3D objects that have been imported in there. Because again, as you start to explore Reality Composer with the content library, you'll be fascinated with what's there initially, and then you'll start to realize, actually, I need a bit more. I need more things in here. For one, there are no people. So I'm going to do that split screen again with Keynote, and I've brought in some of the people here, and I'm going to bring them into the Reality Composer file. And again, just resize them, rotate them, and we're just going to pop them right into the scene. It's quite big. And so now we have a person walking along the street here. And again, the same for the lady. Bring her in, resize and rotate. And then we've got her in the scene as well. Now, as always, the great thing with Apple tools is the continuity of the use of these tools across different platforms. So there is the undo button at the top, just up here. And that's always handy, especially when you're working with rotations and things like that. And so here we have essentially just a very basic scene, but one that we could definitely enhance and embellish. Now, I've shown you how to do this with the 2D content. So let's go ahead now and talk about when we've made something in a tool like Tinkercad and we've saved it, we've exported it as that USDZ file. How do we get it into Reality Composer? So we're going to go back to the plus, and we're going to go right to the top where it says imported. And here's where we're going to add our content. So I'm going to go into, I think it's in my iCloud drive. I have some swings that I made earlier in Tinkercad as part of designing accessible playground equipment. And I thought, well, that would be great to bring into this type of scene that I'm building here. So I can see that it's saved as a USDZ file. I love organizing my 3D content using files because it's right directly in my iPad. I don't have to download it again. And so that's really helpful for me. Now, when you see it sitting there, it's ready to be added in. If for some reason it just gets stuck with a cube, you may need to restart the Reality Composer app or restart your iPad. There's been some form of an issue with uploading the file into Reality Composer. So there we have my little swings. And they're a bit small. Just going to make them slightly bigger. And again, these were designed as sort of wheelchair accessible swings for children using Tinkercad and the different shapes that are available. So you could absolutely set up an empty playground, as it were, and provide a provocation for your students of saying, right, use your 2D and 3D digital skills to create and design a playground so that it's accessible for all children. Maybe you have accessible swings like this. Maybe you have signs that are posted in lots of different languages to make it accessible for all children. But it's just a great way of being able to utilize something like Reality Composer. So now that we've finished, we've brought in 2D content, 3D content. We're going to go ahead and view this in AR. So I'm going to go ahead and press AR at the top. Again, looking for that flat surface. And again, you can absolutely pinch your fingers on the screen to resize. Make it quite big so that if you wanted to essentially walk around it, that you could. And you can see you've not lost any of the quality of your 2D content in there. You've got your flowers, got the people, as well as our 3D content. And the quality is still very, very good. Even if I were to scale this up quite a bit, I can still see. And again, using your iPad in this way, you can have students physically walk around spaces that you designed, such as like Leslie did with the classroom, or have them do creative storytelling, which is another really great use of being able to screen record with the iPad. Okay. And again, very easy to integrate with text that you want to have in here. So you can have signs posted in, or as Leslie showed, putting different problems in there for students to explore. And it's really very, once you get in and start playing around with it a bit more and you get used to how things move and how they look and feel within the app, it really becomes second nature to start playing. And I realize that for teachers, this is not how we would naturally approach teaching content, but we are coming up against a generation that is growing up with these types of resources. AR is going to become more and more prominent for them. So if we can get on that bandwagon of utilizing it in a positive way for customizing our own content, making it more immersive for our students, the better off I think we'll be, and the more we'll be able to engage with them. So are there any questions at this time of bringing content into Reality Composer? Does everyone feel like that process is fairly simple and easy to navigate, whether it's using the content library, whether it's bringing in your own 3D content or 2D content? If you could just give me a thumbs up or an emoji in the chat, just to let me know if you feel like that process is fairly straightforward. Thank you, Lindsay. That's great. Are there any questions at that time? Okay, so Lindsay, if it keeps crashing, it might be that you have to do an update, either with the iOS or potentially Reality Composer might need an update itself. We did notice that this happened with some students when we shared things to them that was slightly made on slightly newer iOS, and the Reality Composer was not accepting it on their version. So it might just need a simple update. But yes, do reach out later on in email if you think there are any other problems. Okay, so we're going to jump back into Keynote real quick, just because I'm conscious of the time here. And so I just want to invite you now to have a think about what we've learned today, the different things that we've talked about, which I realize Reality Composer is a very complex tool, and I could probably spend about an entire day talking to you about all the different things that you can do. But in what ways could you begin to apply what you've learned, what you've seen into your classroom? Maybe it's taking those first initial steps and creating a 3D model that you could share to students so they could have it on their iPad and explore with it. Maybe it's you're creating a provocation and you're just going to video it. You're going to do a screen recording of it, and that screen recording is going to be shared to spark that student's interest. Maybe it's a way that you could demonstrate different maths concepts by bringing math to life, or science. Any suggestions you have, I'll just give you 30 seconds to pop that into the chat. Oh, some good suggestions. Making an escape room. Yep, absolutely. That's a great way. And using it for students as an assessment. That would be very interesting to see. So again, we will be coming back for session 5 in about 2 weeks. Oh, there we go. So please do make notes in your workbook of anything that you've managed to do with Reality Composer in your classrooms, add it in, and those reflection questions as well. Make sure that you're having a read through of those and thinking about them following any use of Reality Composer in your class. Please do share what you learned today. If you created something, I'd love to see it. You can use the hashtag AppleRTC and do tag us at ACSRTC as well, so that we can see what you've had as your key takeaways from today's session. Just to close, we are open for session 5, and this is going to be looking at ways that you can integrate sound into AR. So really, we're looking at AR as a way of bringing in all the best elements of everyone can create, the video, the drawing, the photography, and the music directly into tools like Reality Composer. So session 5 is now available to sign up for. It will be the same time as today's session, but in 2 weeks' time. So session 5, I'll leave that up for just a moment, and I'll open it up now if there are any questions at this time.